Hey, what's going on, Summit students, parents? Welcome back. If I haven't met you before, my name is Reagan Jones. I'm our student director here at the Apex campus. And today we have two very awesome people joining us. We have Eric and Amelia Villeneuve. Eric and Amelia, there's his waving hand. It'd be a lot harder for me to introduce you guys. So why don't you guys just go ahead, introduce yourself real quick, and tell us a little bit about how you guys are involved at Summit.
Yeah. Well, I'm Amelia. Obviously, Eric. We've been married 21 years. We love Summit. Eric serves as an elder at Summit. I serve in student ministry. We have 4 kids. We have 2 boys, 2 girls, ranging from 8 to 17. So
That's us.
Yeah, that's us. I love that. I think this is really special for me because I know in these parent equips, it's a lot harder. Like I am not a parent. I'm a 26-year-old guy that lives in a studio apartment, and so there's a lot of value in having two parents who have gone through the ups and the downs of parenthood, marriage, life, and all the things. And so we're really really excited to have you guys here today.
Thank you.
Um, our goal in our conversation here today is we simply want to talk about confession. What happens when a student confesses sin to us? Because that's really the goal, right? And this is a student ministry conversation, and this is also like a parenthood conversation. So when we talk about like how can we partner together, how can we best help equip you guys to handle confession of sin? What do we do when students confess sins to us as a ministry? And so we want to create a culture where students see the need for confession and parents respond in love. And I say the word need right there because students have to understand first and foremost that like confession is a good thing. 1 John 1:9, James 5:1, like it's a wonderful thing. But for some reason, there feels like a very large gap between like students confessing and like their parents. And that always, I mean, that's hard for everybody. That was hard for me growing up. Like I never confessed sin to my parents. I was found out in things. Like those are two very different things.
Me
Um,
too.
and there have been several times where like I've sat with students in the past and they've confessed things to either me or to their small group leaders. But the idea of talking to their parents about it just seems like this unfathomable task. And we have to remind them of like, hey, no, these are the people that love you most in the world. They're the people that can help you in the world. But there's just this big gap between students and the idea of confessing to their parents. I say all of this basically to help frame this conversation that as a ministry, like, yes, we want to encourage our students to confess sin to leaders, to one another, to staff, but ultimately we're pointing them back to you guys. And so as we send students back to parents, what do we do? What do we do when a student confesses sin to us? Um, and so Eric and Amelia, I'll basically throw this to you guys. Um, Maybe just starting us off here, can you tell us a time when maybe one of your students, or even Amelia, one of the students in your small group, maybe confessed sin to you and you didn't respond in the right way?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I know you had some really good comments up here. Get started on any of those.
well, I was just gonna, yeah.
You listed some really good Bible verses, and we wanted to pull a couple of truths out of those Bible verses.
Go for it. That's always a good thing.
Yeah, and then I think the 1 John 1:9 really, like, I just spent a little bit of time like praying through that and preparing for that. And that part of like, if we confess our sins, he's faithful and just to forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. That
Yeah.
part of forgive us, I looked up the Greek in it and I love just what it said of like, when God forgives us, when we confess, he sends that away. He lets go of our sin. He keeps it no longer. And I just loved that picture of him like casting our sin away when he forgives us. And I like that's something that we've learned to try to do with our kids
Yeah.
when they do us. And like we're not holding that over them. We're not shaming them with that.
Yeah.
And we haven't done it perfectly.
Yeah.
And I would say like with our children, actually I would probably rewind if I can and do a parenting example.
Yeah.
Before we got married, that's a time where you share things, that you need to share with each other as you're preparing for marriage. And we both had sins to confess to one another. And I would say they were equal in weight.
Yeah.
Eric responded awesome with mine, but I like personalized his confession to me. I personalized it when it wasn't personal, and
Yeah.
therefore my reaction was I felt threatened by it, and so I therefore thought, why, if I threaten him, if you ever do this again, or then blah blah blah, and like that was wrong.
Yeah.
And I like the Lord showing me through that, like it was kind of an idolatrous view of our relationship or of Eric.
Yeah.
And, that dream of having like this perfect husband or this perfect marriage, wasn't really healthy. And so
Yeah.
I, Lord, using that to teach me how to react to confession has actually helped me um, so much in parenting my kids
Yeah.
and my students. And so the last thing I would say we want to do is like try to threaten them or shame them
Yeah.
when they do come to us.
Yeah, so one of the great comments that Amelia made in that, a lot of times as people, whether it's our children that are confessing to us or a spouse, we get in trouble being a safe place for people to confess when we personalize something that shouldn't be personalized.
Oh, that's
Especially a
good.
lot of times as a parent, their kid will mess up, but they don't feel safe to confess because when they were younger and they maybe like dropped a glass on the floor or something that was a mistake, the parent like
Yeah.
personally, and I'm guilty of that. Like that's how I gave that example. Like I personalized
Yeah.
my kids making like somehow it's a sin against me and my pride. Or we're embarrassed that our kids have made a mistake when in reality we want to be like open arms because when our kids come to us with mistakes, we want to reassure them of how much we love them and that we're going to
Yeah.
walk through it. Now,
Yeah.
we're going to get to it in a minute. I think like I think it's one of your questions a little bit further. Like we're not going to consequences are still going to be there, but we
Right.
to personalize it. We don't have to respond in anger. We still want to be like a coach in their life, and that's one thing Amelia and I've always done is we give each other the benefit of the doubt. So if we have to apologize to each other, we
Yeah.
always start by assuming the other person was not intentionally trying to hurt us. When
Mm.
you're trying to confess to you, if you lead with being offended and you're assuming your kid did that on purpose to anger you or to make you mad or to embarrass you, you react
Yeah.
so different than when you assume my kid's just a kid, they just messed up. How do I help them?
Yeah. Yeah. I I love that because I think that's something I saw my dad did for me. Um, I was not great at confession growing up, primarily because of what I saw. I bottled everything up very tightly. But my dad kind of did like what you guys were saying, where I think there's this high expectation, especially for parents or for small group leaders, student directors, that if you do it wrong, well, now I've messed up, and now my kid can't come to me, and like you have to have this perfect almost like this perfect reputation with your kids. And that's just impossible. And like the best thing my dad ever did for me one day was just apologize. I just like, hey man, like I know I haven't done this well. I know I haven't always done it perfectly. I've tried my best. I'm still trying to pursue the Lord. I would love to create a space for us to have these conversations. And like that little thing opened up a dialogue between me and my dad where I'm like, he just became a place where I could just lay things down. And it's like, as you said, Eric, it's not like there's never consequences or anything like that. But I think sometimes it's like parents are sinners, student directors are sinners, small group are sinners, and there is not a 100% standard perfection. You're gonna mess it up with your kid. And in the same way we want like a culture of confession, um, simply like a culture of forgiveness and what that looks like in a two-way street with you and your kid. Um, and
Great.
so even I'll even continue with this. Like how do you guys create that culture in your home? Because I think that's a really nice ideal. What does that look like for your kid to not only like desire to bring things to you, but like how do you guys create that in the home?
Yeah, I think we do try to model it as best as we can. And we have a saying in our house of like, the truth is always best. And
Yeah.
so, and like from the beginning, that when they mess up, whether it's sin or, an accident, if they come to us and tell us, their consequence is going to be way less than if we have to find it out.
That's right.
And so
That's it.
because we've created that since they were younger, that has just kind of cultivated this like safety approach of like, we know that it's best to go ahead and tell mom and dad like now. And like, it actually works. Like,
it's wild, right? Like, it's crazy how that works.
It's crazy. Like, we have a lot of rules with like cell phones and contracts and stuff. And I mean, one of our kids even came, we have a curfew at the 8 o'clock, you have to turn off your phone. And one of them even just came and said, here's my phone for the next day. Cause that's the consequence of if you go past the curfew, you lose your phone the next day. And
and to clarify, whenever, we have to execute that consequence, like we don't get mad, we don't get angry, we don't say, oh, you did it again. We just say, hey, we're admitting it. And so, but the catch is if they don't tell us and turn it in and take the 1 day consequence, then it's a week consequence.
Right.
And so we've taught them when you confess things, it's small. So kind of like when kids are little and they make mistakes, and when you have young kids in the house and they just start making mistakes, like, like my kids would struggle with slamming the door. So that was really mad inside, but me yelling at them doesn't help. However, if the consequence is, hey, if you slam the door, you got to go back and open and close it correctly 3 times.
Right.
We hit a point with the young kids where they would just go back, they would slam the door, and they would come back without us even telling them, and they would open and close it 3 times correctly. But then that taught them, and I didn't have to get angry. I didn't have to make them feel guilty or ashamed. It was just like, this is something we're teaching you to do. And so we're big believers in telling the kids, if you do this, this is the consequence. And if you don't confess to us, then, and we find it, it'll be much worse. And so that's how we help culture, is by letting them know ahead of time. And we've always told them, like, kind of the big things that you will have, kind of like the wrath from your parents, is when you lie to us, hide stuff from us, intentionally disobey us, and all the other stuff. We just have more like natural consequences and don't let our anger get elevated. But hey, we've done it in the past. Like, that's how, so it might sound like we're on this podcast with you, but we're talking from, we have lots of failures to get to where we're at right now.
Yeah. It's so funny to me, like what the enemy would do with this, where I'm like, I think a lot of the times when kids look at confessing sin to their parents, I think of Adam and Eve in the garden running away from God, where I'm like, they've messed up, but for some reason they think, like, I'm sure Amelia's got like all that stuff.
She has paper right here. So.
Oh yeah. But it's literally, it's like you're running away from the one person that loves you. Like you're running and you're hiding. And I think that's a good note for parents there, where it's like, okay, what does God do? He runs after Adam and Eve, and he does love them. Like, but loving has consequences. He killed the animal. He covered them. They got kicked out of the garden. Like, there's this whole definition of love in there. But I can't tell you how many times I've sat with students, and it's literally been like, I forget, I think it was Amelia that said this, but I'm like, I'm so scared to tell my parents. And I'm like, why? Like, I know there's going to be consequences. I know the phone might get taken away. But that right there is the person that loves you most in the world. And it's not going to be what you think. And I literally had a kid come back one time after he talked to his parents about something. And he was like, that went way better than I thought it was going to. And he was just like, my mom didn't yell at me. Like, I got in trouble, but I feel better. And like, it's like there's this weight on their shoulders that they're comparing to consequences. And it's like, do you want to get rid of the weight, or do you not want the consequences? And like, those are the two shoulders that they have. And if students would just understand that there's just the only way to get rid of that weightiness that you feel, that like no one actually knows what's going on, is simply by telling your parents. And it's one of the most freeing things that they could ever experience. But I think I love where you guys are kind of going with this, where it's like, okay, there are consequences when someone messes up. Hey, it's like, love isn't just like, great, you get to do it again. Love means you're going to go back and you're going to do this correctly. You may lose the phone. You have to shut the door correctly. What does love mean when we say we want parents to respond in love? Like we're talking like biblical love, God's love. What does that actually mean?
Well, I think you kind of already said, like, when I think about that, I thought about Eden and like how God responded to Adam and Eve. They were, like you said, ashamed,
Yeah.
hiding. And I just love, he started with those heart probing questions. So he didn't even really have to say, Adam, you did this, Eve, you did this. And I love the idea. I think Ted Tripp, Shepherding a
Yeah.
Child's Heart, kind of taught us that many years ago with just those heart probing questions of like, well, tell me, why you decided to do this, or, whatever the question is, depending on the situation.
Yeah.
And just let them kind of answer the problem in their own hearts.
Yeah.
And because listening is like the biggest tool that we have, and they want to feel known and heard and loved. But I think when you ask those questions and they're answering and you're listening, like you're earning, Eric says it all the time, the more you listen, the more you earn the right to speak.
Yeah.
And I think that, the more we can listen to our kids, the better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that, because part of our job is to help them make correct or right decisions going forward. And if we don't listen to them and understand where they're coming from, and all we do is lead from, like, respond from, you got it wrong and we're angry
Yeah.
and you need to do better, then we can't really coach them up and help them on how to make better decisions next time, and why it's important and
Right.
why it matters in the rest of their life. It takes a lot of time. I think that's the one thing that I had to learn as a parent when the kids were younger. It's really quick and easy and convenient for me just to get angry and be swift
Yeah.
and execute judgment and get them moved along. But to actually listen to confession and ask questions and then pursue them takes time. Like the story you gave from the Garden of Eden. So there was consequences. God had to kill an animal to put skin on them to give them clothes, and then he had to put them out of the garden because that was what he said would happen. But then he spends time pursuing them and reconciling the relationship. And so whenever we have kids that have to confess to us and we have to go through the consequences, we also then spend time pursuing them afterwards to make sure the relationship is reconciled, not just I doled out a punishment on you and sent you to your room. Now we get to my room, but you still need to pursue the relationship.
Yeah. It's the whole idea that you can be right but lose the person. And so we do this in conflict resolution all the time. But just because you hand out the discipline, just because the decision is correct, doesn't mean you've actually discipled your kid. And this is something like Jeremy Berger, our next gen pastor, he hits on us a lot in student ministry, of the difference between discipleship and discipline. That like discipleship has an end goal towards Christ likeness. Discipline means do the right thing. And we're trying to get our kids towards Christ likeness, not necessarily to simply always do the right thing.
Good stuff.
And so I think maybe like one or two more questions here, but I think you guys are an interesting case here where you kind of have kids all across the age spectrum. Is this different? Like when you were with little kids, middle schoolers, high schoolers, like is the way you approach your oldest the same way you approach your youngest? Like has that changed over the years, or has it been pretty consistent?
Absolutely, it's changed. But, like some of it hasn't. Like the listening, we really try to do, whether it's listening to the 8-year, confess that he said something rude on the playground, like that is going to look a lot different than, one of the older ones confessing, something bigger and harder. And so, but still like listening, and obviously consequences are different. We don't spank our 17-year-olds. That would just be awkward.
Probably a good idea. All right, I'll end with this one. What would you guys say to the parent that feels like they've just blown it? Like they haven't responded well. They feel like there's this big gap between them and their kids. How do we bridge the gap? What would you say to that parent?
Yeah, they have blown it. They've blown it.
Yeah.
However, we've all blown it, right? Like I've blown it, they've blown it. And so what happens when you blow it? It's what you do next that really matters. So think about a time when you've blown it with your kid. And if you're listening to this, podcast right now, you're probably thinking of a time where you blew it with your kid. Go ahead and break the cycle of not being a safe place to confess by you going right now and thinking about the time that you blew it, and go confess to your kid. Like, there's a normal thing that I've said in the life of my children where I've gone to my children and told them, I am here. What you did was wrong, but I'm here to apologize to you because how I reacted to you was wrong. You did was bad, but I raised my voice or was ugly or yelled at you, and I should not have done that. And I'm apologizing that I did wrong. And so the parent that's listening to this and says they've blown it, just own that. You have blown it. Go and apologize to your kid for the last time that you hurt them and were not a safe space. And that's how you start to rebuild the cycle to become a safe space, is by you initiating. So you can take that action step today. All of our journeys start with, like one step. There's all these sayings about that, but I just ran my first half marathon, and that started a year ago by going out the door and walking for 30 minutes. And so, listening to this, and this is not an area that's a success in your household, then go do one confession to your kid today. And
I love that.
Start doing that. And 1 year from now, you'll be running a half marathon of a confessing household.
I love that, because I think when I look back in my life, I remember my dad's apologies more than anything else. And I think, like, when we think, all right, how does student ministry and parenthood, and even like Amelia, how does small group leaders and like this little triangle all fit together? I'm like, kids are going to mess up. They're going to do dumb things. They're going to sin. That's what sinners do. And so, like, when someone confesses it to a small group leader or to staff, I'm like, we're pointing them back to you guys. And in that, like Eric, like you just said, creating a space and a culture where you can be a person of peace and a person of safety for your kid. When those two things work together, when we don't hide things from you guys, when we don't point kids to other directions, when we send them back your way, and when we create a culture of confession, I think that's where we see a lot of freedom for our kids, and a lot of hope and joy in the Lord. Again, it's a process, like you just said. Even if you start tomorrow doing the right thing, it takes time, and don't be discouraged in that process, because it's a good thing to fight for. Eric and Amelia, thank you guys so much for being with us tonight, sharing all your wisdom. You guys are much more wiser than I am, but I appreciate you guys being on here.
Thank you, Reagan.
That sounds great. Thank you so much.
Of course. Well, thank you guys. Cool. Hey, parents, thank you guys for listening again. We'll see you guys next month. And Summit students, parents, not Summit students, Summit students, parents, you are sent.